So you guys are here today. We're going to go ahead and talk about understanding Google Analytics. So what we're going to be going through is understanding, how Google Analytics works, and really at the end of the day, how can we actually take this information and apply it to our web presence and our business to help us get better, to help us improve our business and to help our online presence. Google Analytics is one of those unique kind of tools where just doing it, unlike for instance, potentially social media, Google Search Console, SEO, where when you do those types of platforms and those types of strategies, you're actually like improving your SEO or your rankings or your engagements or your reach. Here with Google Analytics though, is just doing Google Analytics doesn't necessarily is going to help you with your rankings or your reach, but what it's going to do is it's going to help us understand that so that we can then kind of apply that to those efforts. So really that's kind of the interesting part about Google Analytics and how that is. So like I said, we're going to go over kind of what is Google Analytics to make sure that we're on the same page here. We're also going to start then navigating Google Analytics just a little bit so you kind of understand it. But really, what we want to do is we want to show you some different examples, and we want to show you some of the analytics so that you can understand what we're looking at, why we're looking at it, and then how to apply it. And throughout the presentation, you'll be hearing kind of some of the strategy of how we can kind of blend that into what this, again, with your marketing strategy and what this is going to look like and how this is going to help. So first, I just like to make sure that everyone knows what Google Analytics is. So just know that it's completely free. So there's no, again, cost involved or anything like that. So it's a completely free analytics software tool. It's actually the #1 analytics software tool in the world. And essentially how it is, and why I like to kind of mention this middle part here, is it's implemented via kind of a code that gets installed onto the website. And then every time someone comes to the website, it's going to be tracking them. Now, the reason I kind of mention this is that what's kind of nice is once you install it once, as long as nothing, obviously happens to your website, or if you don't rebuild your website or things like that, is that it's always going to run and you don't necessarily have to worry about it. But one of the things you do need to make sure is that it's installed correctly, but it only needs to be installed once. So unfortunately, again, I can't tell you necessarily how to install it from the point of that everyone in here may have a different website system, meaning maybe some of us have WordPress, some of us have Wix, some of us have Squarespace, and they're all a little bit different. But what I encourage you to do is just to simply Google, install Google Analytics on blank, on Wix, on Squarespace, and it will actually walk you through exactly how to do it. It's actually pretty simple now. A lot of times it's just taking a code and putting that in there. And so we can, again, just get it installed and kind of be on our way. Now, another thing that I always like to kind of mention too is, if you're maybe not ready to use analytics like, tomorrow, sometimes people can find, and you'll kind of potentially see why, can kind of see Google Analytics as overwhelming. But the reason I mention this is that you want to just make sure that you have your code installed, because Google cannot retroactively go get data. What that means is if you decide to wait to actually, install your Google Analytics code, or for instance, if it does break, unfortunately, what's going to happen is that that data is going to stop recording. And so I mentioned that to make sure that you have Google Analytics. Honestly, everyone at the end of this presentation should just go make sure they have Google Analytics, or at the very least try and just install it, just because again, it's going to be able to kind of take all of that data there and be able to, again, start recording it so that when you are ready, or that if you're ready now, that we can actually start recording that so we can start analyzing it. So again, the first step is just making sure that we have Google Analytics, understanding that it is free, and then just making sure that it does get recorded. So the next part is just kind of understanding how Google Analytics is laid out. And so with that, oops, sorry about that. Just jumped really far there. Sorry about that, guys. So the first step is going to be looking at Google Analytics, but really how it's laid out. And so with this is understanding how it's laid out is that there are really kind of mainly 5 main components of a Google Analytics kind of page. So the first one is the admin section. I always like to kind of start with this one because it's just going to be kind of, what you'd think. It's going to be the admin section. So this is where we can actually, for instance, add users, get the tracking code. So if you're setting this up, if you need to check something, it's going to be there. We're going to kind of go into some more things that you can do with the admin section as well, but that's really kind of where it's going to be at. Number two is probably one of the most ones you're going to be dealing with, which is the account analytics menu. This is where you're going to kind of, jump around within analytics. Now, analytics and continuously today has a ton of predetermined reports, which is what we're going to be focusing on today to get kind of our baseline, knowing that you can actually start to create customized reports for whatever you feel is whatever you're looking for. But know that Google Analytics literally has dozens upon dozens of, of different kind of reports that you can look at. And that's what we're going to be kind of looking at. And you can kind of see the different categories there of audience, acquisition, behavior, and conversions. That's essentially what we're going to be kind of talking about today, because those are the different category of reports. And underneath those categories are going to be a slew of different reports that we can utilize and analyze. So moving on to is number 3 is probably a super important one to remember, and I'll kind of be reminding you throughout the presentation as well, but this is the date range. And what's kind of cool is not only is it just obviously you set your date range and that's what it's going to collect, but it also then will allow you to compare data. And that's actually what you're seeing on the screen here, where the blue line would be whatever your current data set is. The orange line is what you're comparing it to, and that may be from the previous year, the previous month, the previous week, whatever you're looking for. But then from there, it will actually do the math for you and, again, show you what is happening with that. So it's a really kind of cool system, and this is honestly really where rubber hits the road. As we're going through all of these different reports, it's super critical to, again, start to have Google Analytics run, because yes, Google Analytics and just analytics on itself is great, but if we can't compare it to anything and start to create a story and understand what's happening, again, it gets hard to actually analyze what's going on. So it may be one of those things that, again, to be honest with you, if you haven't started Google Analytics, knowing that, yes, we want to get it started as fast as possible, but we may not be able to start to obviously understand the trends and all of the things that go along with that for maybe, months to years, understanding how, again, being able to compare data. Obviously, if you start it right now, we can't compare to 2019 if you never had Google Analytics going, because again, it can't retroactively go get data. But again, once we get past that point of being able to compare month to month, quarter to quarter, year to year, and everything like that, that's really where we can kind of tell the story as well. And that's what analytics is gonna, is gonna be able to help us tell. Number 4 is just kind of your export and shortcut menu. So it's kind of self-explanatory here, but this is where we can, again, download reports as maybe PDFs, Excel, you can save them, you can email them to people. This is also where, and I'll kind of explain this in the next slide here, but if you can actually set up, which is kind of cool, that Google Analytics actually emails you reports every single month. Well, you would actually, again, set that up within this export and shortcut menu. So you would tell Google Analytics which reports, again, you want to have emailed to you every month, potentially every week, whatever it may be, and you'd actually set that up there. And then last but not least, and probably not a shocker, is that Google, being a search engine, has a search functionality. But what I like to kind of mention to people about this is that this is a great spot, whereas especially as Google Analytics grows and gets more and more predetermined reports and gets more categories and all those types of things, sometimes you can kind of forget where you found a report. And so you can use the search functionality to find that report, and it will take you directly there. So for instance, if you're looking at something and you're like, okay, hey, Ben was talking about again, a mobile report, but I can't remember where that's at. You can literally just go to there and type in mobile, and it will give you the answers and the options of the different mobile reports that would be allowed for you. So really kind of cool, just to be able to kind of get directly there. But those are going to be your 5 main points when you're looking at a Google Analytics, report. Like I kind of mentioned with admin, just want to briefly go over this as well, is knowing that it's single sign-on, which means that you can grant access, which is phenomenal. and then you can control that access. So for instance, if you're working with like a web agency like myself, if you have different employees, if you have different partners, whatever it may be, you can give them access and then you can kind of restrict their access, just like a lot of products are today. And so it makes sharing, just Google Analytics, makes sharing access very easy. Also, this allows you to have multiple accounts. So for instance, again, no matter if you maybe have multiple accounts, if you're working with other individuals and you need to share accounts with each other, you can then kind of find all of your accounts and be able to do that. So what some things you can look at and to do in the admin section is you can actually set up filters. So potentially maybe you want to set up an IP filter to get rid of the traffic that's coming from you or your office. You can set up those types of filters. You can also set up filters depending on location. So there's a bunch of different filters. If for some reason you want to filter out a certain subset of data, you can look to kind of do that here. You can also manage the automated reports that I kind of told you about. So we can kind of see, what reports are being sent, what are the, the timelines and the dates, who are they being sent to. You can manage all of that in the admin section. And you can also always reference and get your tracking info if you ever forget about that or, need to reference that again. Like this happens a lot of times, like if you rebuild your website, if you have a new, potentially like you're setting up a MailChimp account, you can actually, integrate your Google Analytics, certain things like that. You may need to, know where your tracking code is, and that can be found in the admin section. So what we're going to start going over here is we're actually going to be focusing on 4 main categories. There are 5 that a lot of times you'll see on analytics, but the 4 that we're going to focus on is going to be audience, acquisition, behavior, and conversions. The other one, the real-time one, I put that up there because you'll see it. That one's more kind of just fun to look at than most likely is going to be super useful for you. It's kind of self-explanatory with the name there of what that report is telling you, but the real-time report is actually going to tell you what's happening on that second on your page. Now, one thing I do like to kind of mention with the real-time is sometimes people get nervous if they've installed their Google Analytics correctly. So there's kind of a fail-safe way or a little bit of a trick just to make sure that you have it set up correctly and that you just kind of peace of mind. So when you set up Google Analytics, what a lot of times I tell people to do is go to the real-time report and then just pull up your website on your phone. And then literally within a few seconds, if you've set it up correctly, it'll actually pop up and you'll actually see you kind of, again, it'll say, hey, there's another new user, and you'd actually be able to see that it's you by the location, the timing, and the page that you're on. So you can use the real time for that. Otherwise, like I said, it's more fun to kind of look at, and the other 4 that we're looking at are going to be much more probably, again, practical in using. One other quick thing about real time, though, I will say is it is kind of fun to sometimes watch, especially if you're having a big event, because you can see all the traffic kind of come in during that event. So one of the things that we're going to be talking about throughout the presentation, when we start looking at all these different reports, it's critical to understand that there are essentially 8 different types of metrics that Google use to allow you to then kind of compare all of the different types of things that we're going to talk about. So what I mean by that is these are the 8, again, kind of critical metrics that Google uses. And then when we start talking about, for instance, like a location report, well, then we can, compare Minneapolis to St. Paul traffic using these metrics. And so with that, it's just understanding what these metrics are, because these are the main metrics that are going to tell us the story with the other, we kind of underneath the subsect or the category reports that we're going to kind of go on here. So the first thing is, again, like I said, just, understanding what these are. So the first one is users. So users are going to be the number of users that visited the site. So the amount of, again, the people that came into the actual site. Now, new users are obviously telling you which ones are new and which ones are kind of essentially returning. Then sessions are how many times users visited your site. So you can kind of see here in this example, we had 1,700 users visit the site 1,900 times. So what that's telling us, obviously, is that we had, again, some people come more than once. And that's where the next metric comes into play, which is number of sessions per user. And this, again, is just kind of doing some simple math, and you can kind of see it here, with the 1,700 people coming in to then being there 1,900 times. So again, you're going to have some people come in multiple times, but it's good to understand, again, the different terminology and the different things we have going there. Page views is, obviously going to be how many, pages did all of these users view during that time period. And again, this is all being pulled in from the time period that you determine from there. And you can also compare this kind of data, which I'll get into, and you can see at the bottom of the screen. Pages per session is just doing another kind of math. So all those times that those 1,700 people in this example came to the site, on average, how many pages did they view? Also, the average session duration, meaning that obviously every time someone came to the site, on average, how long were they on the site for? And then last but not least is bounce rate. So what bounce rate is going to tell us is how many times people came in and did, we looked at one page and then essentially hit the back button. So this is sometimes a good indicator of the quality of traffic that we're essentially kind of getting for our pages. So again, at the bottom of the screen is just showing you kind of what it would look like if you're comparing it to another subset of data or a date range. So you can kind of see that it's kind of cool. It puts it into green, obviously good. Gives you that, the users went up 216% in this example. The bounce, or, some of the other ones, the bounce rate, the pages per session, unfortunately decreased, and they put it in red. So again, this can start to kind of help you understand the story of what's going on, and not only, again, see if there's any pain points, but also start validating different marketing channels and what you're doing overall, and just the overall health of your website. So one thing that I get asked a lot of times is, okay, Ben, I understand these metrics, but what's kind of good and what's kind of bad? And again, it's hard for me to say that to obviously a group of individuals like ourselves, because everyone's going to be a little different. And so the answer to that is kind of twofold. One is, this is why we need analytics running, so that we can tell the story. Understanding that we obviously want to see progress. We want to not see necessarily red. We want to see green across the board, but we want to use this in a way that it can, kind of, again, tell a story and have us understand the full kind of picture of it. So that is kind of the one, again, kind of step, is understanding that just because it may not align with your, again, your sister site, your friend site, your colleague site that you know of within their analytics, doesn't necessarily mean that it's bad. We have to kind of, again, take the grand scheme of things. But I will say there are some metrics that we may want to look at in trying to, again, kind of see if we're kind of hitting some of those just kind of, benchmarks. So the first one is pages per session. Pages per session, we want to try to strive for, again, the methodologies, we want to try to strive for 3 pages. The idea behind that is that they come into the page, could be the home page, could be wherever, but then they look at another page, potentially like your services, and then they go to your contact page. Now, again, some of this may differ depending on how obviously your site is set up, how many pages you have, and things like that. But we do want to strive for, again, kind of that 3.0 kind of pages per session. Now, the higher the pages per session, a lot of times that's good, because that means people are checking out more things on our site. But again, just to kind of combat that in a sense, is if you only have maybe 3 to 5 pages, most likely you're not going to see that, because you don't have enough content for people to be able to kind of see. Also, another thing is bounce rate. To be honest with you, an average bounce rate is usually between about 50 to 60%. A lot of times, people kind of come into the site, may just be looking for one thing and then bouncing out. We obviously want to get them to last longer, but it's also important to kind of understand that. Also, again, going back to it, it really kind of depends on your industry. I'll give you an example. I have a client that does emergency ice dam removal. Well, I'll be honest, his bounce rate's through the roof, because in that particular, again, business and industry, they're looking just to come to the site, find some quick information, and then get out there and obviously solve their problem that they're having. Whereas we have some more, again, like for instance, medical or legal clients that have a lot higher, pages per session and a lot lower bounce rate, because there's a lot more things to digest and that we need to kind of see. So again, these are just a couple examples of, yes, we have some benchmarks, but we really need to kind of apply it to our business and apply it to some of the other things that we're talking about here today, and then also apply it to our past history once we build up that Google Analytics history for that. So what we're going to kind of get into now is those main categories that I kind of talked about, understanding that all the things that you see here on out is, again, we're going to be using those 8 metrics that we talked about to now compare with each other, so that, again, we can kind of compare all of this data and start to figure out what's working better, what's performing worse, and all of those types of things, again, to kind of tell that story, but now on a more granular aspect for these different types of categories. So the first one is audience. So what the audience report is going to tell us is it's going to be information about the users on our site. So it's going to be who is kind of on our site is really what we're looking at. This is kind of the main report when you kind of get into Google Analytics, when you kind of log in. It's a lot of times going to be the main report that Google Analytics pushes, because, again, it's going to tell you mainly who's on the site and how many people are coming, essentially. So, but we can actually dig even a little bit deeper, and we can actually figure out some demographics. And you may just want to check this. A lot of times you have to enable this just so that Google Analytics can actually track this, but you would just simply click the demographics and you'd click enable and you would allow that. But once you do this Google will actually start tracking things like age ranges, things like gender. And sometimes people ask me, how does Google get that information? And a lot of times it has to do with their different partnerships or people having Google accounts and things like that. What's kind of cool is actually at the top of the screen, it will actually tell you what percentage of your users that came into the site that they can apply that data to. So you may look at the demographics and find out, okay, so Google was able to apply that to 42%, to maybe 24%. It's pretty rare to get it, again, very high, but obviously you can kind of take that data and then extrapolate that as however you see fit. Another one that you can do is kind of behavior. And so within the behavior, we can actually start to compare new traffic versus returning traffic, the engagement, how long did they, again, stay on the site, and we can actually, are some 0 to 10 seconds, are some, 11 to 20 seconds, over 30 seconds, over a minute. Yes, we have the averages, but now we can actually parse out some of that a little bit further and actually dive into, again, how long people are staying on the site, not only just from an average standpoint, but actually breaking that out. We also have, again, kind of geo reports. These become usually pretty, again, popular and useful as well. So we can obviously do location, not only just, again, countrywide, but then we can go down to state, and then we can go down to city. So this is where I was using it as an example. We can start to compare traffic from, St. Louis Park to Buffalo, New York. We can compare traffic to Duluth to Rochester. Obviously, it kind of depends on your business. If you're local and especially retail, most likely all of or most of your traffic should and will be local, and we can kind of compare there. But potentially if you're national or international, there may be, again, obviously opportunities there to look at different locations from a country or a statewide, even a citywide too, if you're obviously comparing New York to, Las Vegas, something like that. But also, especially when you get to like international, or for instance, if you deal a lot of times with people that speak a different language, either in different communities or different areas or whatnot, it's kind of cool. You can actually see what language people are accessing your site from or on. So it's a really kind of a cool thing to kind of be able to see. I will say probably my favorite report within the audience report is going to be the mobile. And so this is going to compare traffic from your desktop to your mobile device to tablets. So what's great about this is, again, we can use those 8 metrics, and we can then kind of compare the bounce rate on a mobile device to a desktop. We can compare how long someone's spending, on our site from a tablet compared to a mobile device. And so it can be really super useful, especially when we're talking about web development, especially, within SEO, we start talking about user experience, and marketing, we start talking about user experience and all these types of things. We can actually start to break those down, because most of us probably will be, analyzing analytics in our website from a desktop. Some people from a mobile, obviously, as well. But a lot of times we see business owners and site creators, we're kind of creating, we're accessing, and we're analyzing sites from a desktop, which is great. But sometimes it's important to obviously look at it and see, what users are doing from a mobile device. And not only is that important just because it's out there and we all utilize it, it's actually because over, again, the majority of traffic now online and just in the internet is done from a mobile device. And most likely, if you were to look at these reports, And, you know, depends on some of the industry, but most industries out there, even some, you know, a lot of them B2B, we see a lot more traffic now, even on mobile, than we do even desktop. And this is also a fun one. If you've had Google Analytics installed for a few years, it's really kind of cool to go back and kind of compare and just kind of see the explosion and the growth of mobile onto your again, Google Analytics and specifically your site. So again, this is going to be kind of the audience reports. This is going to be again, kind of being able to see who's on the site. So, and then, as we go through, what we're going to be doing is we're starting at kind of the top level here with audience of who's on the site. Then we're going to kind of keep digging and digging and digging with these other kind of categories. And as we start to kind of understand how Google Analytics is laid out and how we can kind of use this information there. So with that said, is the next one is acquisition. This is actually my favorite type of reports because this is telling us where people are coming from. This is a lot of times where you can start to help yourself validate a lot of marketing efforts that you may be doing. If that's, social media, if that's even offline marketing, there's some, again, correlation we can see here. If that is obviously search engine optimization, whatever it may be, we can actually start to kind of see that. So you can see there are different channels here. And so what these channels mean, again, this is where, again, users and how they got to your site, excuse me. So the first one is direct. Direct traffic means that they went to a, again, kind of a user, a browser bar and typed in www.skolmarketing.com. Or they typed in a specific page, or they did something like that. So a lot of times what direct traffic will tell us, which is kind of nice, is that most likely these people knew about us because they have to have a direct link or a direct, again, kind of access point to our website by typing in skolmarketing.com or, again, potentially bookmarking it. So that's where, again, direct traffic is kind of coming from. Organic is going to be any search engine out there. So that's going to be obviously Google, Bing, Yahoo, all the search engines out there, and they're kind of, again, just marked by Google Analytics to kind of be able to pull into here. So we can actually see how did people find us via a search engine. So obviously this is super powerful in understanding kind of SEO and some of those efforts you're doing, because this is going to show us how many people actually found us on Google instead of just typing us in or finding, us on social media. Referral traffic is going to be anything that's not a search engine and not a social media site that is an actual website. So a couple things with referral traffic. This could be like, for instance, if you're part of a networking group and you have a profile, if you're on like even things like Nextdoor or, again, anything like that, a lot of times, again, if we have a link and they click on it, it's actually going to track it because it's another website that's not a social media site and not a search engine. One thing to know about referral traffic, though, this is a lot of times where you'll find spam. Now, Google Analytics tries its hardest and has spent a lot of time and money into their system to really try to, again, weed out a lot of spam and things that aren't needed for the site. But it is important to obviously look at this, especially, again, here's an example, is that if you look at, your audience report and you see we've got 10,000 visitors and you're like, wow, that's so awesome. We had 10,000 visitors. Well, now we look at the acquisition and we look at referral, and 90% of that 10,000 was referral traffic and maybe was spam. So this again is where I'm kind of going with this, is that's why we want to start with audience and then start to kind of, move away from quantitative data to then qualitative data. And that's really what we're kind of looking for here, is we're getting more and more qualitative data. Every time we can add a data point that's being allowed to kind of tell us like, okay, hey, great. Okay, direct traffic is they most likely knew us because they had to obviously directly type us in, or organic, they found us and they were looking for our products and services, or referral is, again, we probably set up some profile, but there may be some spam in there as well. So again, it's kind of going into and understanding all these. Social media traffic is obviously going to be social platforms out there. So your Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, things like that. And so, and to clarify this too, when it comes to social media, it's actually, again, measuring and tracking the amount of traffic that's leaving a social media site and coming to your website. So it's not talking about how many likes you got, how many comments or how many, engagements or reach you got. It's talking about who left social media and came to your site, which obviously can be a super powerful thing. And a lot of times what people are looking to kind of essentially do. Paid is going to be if you're running anything like Google Ads or AdWords or anything like that, that actually will be pulled into there, so you can kind of compare that. Email is obviously email, and this can really help, especially like, for instance, if you have a newsletter that you attach Google Analytics to, that it can actually start to kind of pull in that information. And honestly, throughout Google Analytics, you sometimes will see other or not provided. Google Analytics is not a perfect system. So and obviously there are people out there that have blockers and things like that. And so for instance, Google Analytics may know that they're there, but they don't know any other data about them. So know that you will sometimes see other or not provided. It's usually, again, very small amounts, but that's essentially what that's going to be. Now, what's also kind of nice is all of those different channels that I just talked about, what's kind of cool is you can actually click on them and then actually get more data about them. So the organic, we could actually click on that and find out the breakout of different search engines. We could click on social and find the breakout of different social media sites. So we can actually compare those with the analytics and the metrics that we were talking about at the beginning, those 8 kind of those, we call them awesome analytics, those 8 kind of core metrics, we can then kind of compare them. One thing that I do like to kind of mention here is with keywords is, unfortunately, way back in the day, is that Google Analytics used to show us all of the search terms that someone searched and then ended up coming to our site and finding. Unfortunately, they changed that years and years ago. But what you can get though as kind of a replacement is you can actually connect it to Google Search Console, and they will give you some kind of search query data. It's nowhere near where it used to be, but it's better than nothing. And so you can do that within the acquisition. You do have to set up a Google Search Console, and then it will show you how to connect it to Google Analytics. But it is something that, again, you can essentially kind of do within there. So again, acquisition is going to be how users got to your site. And before we move on even from there, I just wanted to give you some examples of when you click on those different types of reports, what you can see. So for instance, the left one here where it says source up in the upper left-hand corner, that's going to be referral traffic. So this is showing you where all of this traffic came from different websites. And when I was kind of mentioning spam, is you can kind of see here that number 2, website bottraffic.xyz. Spam sites are pretty, obvious to kind of spot. They usually end in .xyz. They have SEO, they have dash, they have a few things like that. But again, this is what you'll kind of see. Social media, you can kind of see here the breakdown of that from Instagram to YouTube to Twitter. The bottom one is going to show you the different search engines. So you can actually see that in this example, Google comprised 95.6% of traffic. I think it's really important. I have a lot of people ask me about Bing and Yahoo, and even DuckDuckGo, as that's becoming more and more kind of popular and they're running more ads. You can kind of see, again, what's going on there and really kind of compare it to your traffic. Most likely Google's going to be, again, extremely dominant, but obviously it's kind of nice to kind of see, and you can even track that over the time periods. And then the landing pages, that's even showing you direct traffic. So number 1 would be your home page, because there's nothing after that. And the other one are your specific landing pages. So in this example, there's the about page, the workshops page, and this is going to show, again, where people directly went to your site from. So just to give you an example of when you click into those, some more data that you can actually get. And this is where you can actually start to compare the individuals within those different categories. So the next one is going to be behavior. So again, moving more and more to that qualitative type of data. And so this is going to show us what users did on our site. So we know, again, essentially kind of who they are and the numbers that are on there. We know where they came from. Now we're talking about what did they actually do on the site. And so the first thing to kind of look at is that the picture that you're seeing to the right is kind of what we call a behavior flow. I will admit it's not the easiest thing to sometimes look at, or you kind of have to play around with it. But what it's trying to show you is that, so the top one is that when someone came into the homepage, where did they go next? And the red is that they essentially kind of left the page, either back or they click the X. So it can kind of help you a little bit in understanding when someone comes in from one page, where did they go next? Again, like I said, it's not the most visually pleasing thing, and it's a little cumbersome at times, but it can be really good information in understanding how people are actually flowing through your site, and potentially if there's any, again, blockades there, if there's any things that we could potentially fix, if there is a huge red mark there, or if, for instance, they're not going to the page that we want. Like, for instance, if we know that we have a user path set up where they come in, they're supposed to go to a service page and then go to the contact page, or for instance, if you have e-commerce and they're supposed to come in from one page and then purchase something or do something like that, and we're seeing that they're not doing that, we can use this to kind of help us understand where those pain points are, and then potentially maybe it is something with web dev, maybe it's something with communication, maybe it's something with marketing or whatnot, but then we can start to kind of analyze that. So again, using analytics to kind of help us, before we were kind of saying tell a story. Now this is actually helping us read the story that's actually happening with user behavior on our site. And so some other things that you can kind of go through too is you can obviously see the amount, the kind of the different pages that are being viewed. So most likely your home page is going to be the #1 page that's viewed. That's usually, again, how it works for obvious reasons. But then we can start to kind of see what other pages on our site. Maybe it's the blog page, maybe it's the services page, maybe it's the shop page, depending on what our site is. We can actually see what those are and kind of compare those again with each other. You can, if you want, you can actually install a site search. So this, and it will give you all of the keywords that people typed in or all the search queries. Now, again, this is not on google.com. This is actually for your website. So for instance, a lot of times people use this in e-commerce and things like that, but it can be useful information that you can actually see what people were searching for on a search, in a little search bar on your website. This could be useful in that if someone keeps, searching for the same thing, maybe that's not as clear as we thought it was, and maybe we need to bring that, or maybe we need to redo that communication on that particular piece. Also, site speed, another kind of, one to kind of look at. I will say that when it comes to site speed, I always tell people to, again, test it on a couple different platforms across, again, the internet, Pingdom, GT Metrics. Obviously, Google even has their own speed test, and then has, again, this that kind of tracks it. The reason I say that is that what we really kind of want to look for is if there's any huge spikes, or for instance, that the trend is that it's very, kind of linear. The reason I say that is that sometimes, within Google Analytics site speed, they may differ. And so a lot of times what I recommend is to look at those, other sites that I mentioned. If it is just Google's, website search speed, GT Metrics, Pingdom, and you can kind of do an average score, but this should kind of align with some of that kind of stuff. And again, what we're looking more is for a trend. Don't necessarily freak out with the exact number, because sometimes those can fluctuate depending on how it's being read and things like that. And then last but not least, within behavior, this one can be really useful as well. It's called event tracking. So what event tracking will allow you to do is it essentially lets you track like a single action. So for instance, if you want to see how many people are downloading or clicking a PDF, which honestly kind of gets tricky to kind of track within Google Analytics if we don't set something like this up, because it's not really a page, it's a file, is that we can set up event tracking. So we can set up event tracking so that when someone clicks on that link to download that PDF, it actually tracks in the back end of Google Analytics. And also maybe you are sending someone to a certain article on another page, or maybe a sister page, or potentially you have something where you're promoting maybe one of your friends' products on your page. You can set up an event tracking to know that when someone clicks on that link and leaves your website, we can actually track that and kind of see how many people are actually clicking on those things. So it's mainly to do kind of a single action, a single click is mainly what it's done. But then, is it a download? Are they leaving the site? Things like that. But these can be very useful, again, like I said, in those different circumstances or those different scenarios on what you're looking and trying to do there. Okay, and then last but not least is conversions. And conversions is obviously going to tell us, now we know who they are, we know where they came from, we know what they're doing on their site. on our site, excuse me, but now are they actually doing what we want them to do, on our website? And a lot of times conversions gets, again, get kind of associated with sales or like, for instance, e-commerce and shopping, which again, yes, it's there, but know that we can set up other things. Like maybe there's a conversion of you want them to fill out a contact form. You want them to set up maybe a free demo. You want them to register for your newsletter, things like that. Maybe you even want to see, like, for instance, if they come in from a certain place, are they visiting a certain page? For instance, maybe you want to see, okay, when someone comes in from, again, search engines, do they, do they go to my service page and then go to the contact page? You can actually set up very detailed type of conversions and actually start to kind of track them. So it's important to realize that, it doesn't matter if you are selling anything on your website or not. Even if your website is informational, is that we can set up conversions to help us understand, if people are doing what we want on there. But then also what's kind of cool is going back to acquisition, it'll actually apply these conversion and these conversion rates to those different channels. Meaning that, so for instance, if you have a conversion set up for that, I want people to sign up for a free estimate for my, again, interior design services. Well, so what we can do then is we can set up that conversion to fill out that free estimate. And then we can actually then track it to see, okay, when people came in from an organic search engine, how many conversions did we have and what percentage was that? When people came in from a social media site, what did that look like? So again, this can be super useful to then go back to like an acquisition, that channel, and look at all of those different channels that those guys are coming in from, and then actually apply a conversion and to see if they're doing what we want them to do. So it can be, again, like I said, very useful, can be, honestly, this is, sometimes it can be overwhelming, and I'm telling you, maybe you don't want to do conversions right off the bat. But the quicker we can get there, again, is the quicker we can kind of move down to these conversions, the more data, the more validation, the more qualitative data we're going to be able to kind of see and be able to kind of apply to our website and to our business. And then, like I kind of mentioned here, is with the e-commerce, you can get, again, really technical too, which is really kind of nice. You can track the shopping experience to see maybe where people are abandoning the cart, obviously how many people are going actually through. Again, we can obviously track the product sales, all of those types of things. One other kind of cool thing that you can also do, which is if you're not selling something, you can actually attribute an arbitrary number or value to your conversion. So hypothetically, if you're saying, hey, if someone were to fill out a, again, estimate, I would say, on my website, I would say that that's worth like $50. If they just use the contact form where they sign up for my newsletter, maybe that's only $5. And you can actually then assign an arbitrary number, and you can actually then start to apply those numbers and those values to your conversions as well. So again, I will say that it does get a little complicated when it gets into conversions, but what is kind of nice is for especially some of like the contact pages and things like that, they have a lot of different templates built up where you just have to kind of walk through it. And this is also something that you, again, if you do end up needing help with, the beauty of it is that it only needs to be set up once. Just like, again, we talked about Google Analytics as a whole, conversions only need to be set up once, and they're set to go then too. So that can also, again, potentially kind of help you if you do need to get help from someone in looking at what that would be and what that would cost and everything like that for you. So again, this is where we're trying to get to, is conversions. And so with that is that, I've mentioned these three kind of throughout the presentation, but it's just reiterating that, again, with Google Analytics, it's not just if we do Google Analytics, it's going to help our, again, us rank higher or get more engagements. What it does, though, is it helps us validate our current marketing efforts. It can put a return on investment to there, because we can actually, now set up conversions. We can put values. We can see conversion percentages. We can see the growth that, as we put in effort into search engine optimization, our traffic from search engines increased maybe 22% from 2018 to 2020 during the same period of time. Or for instance, if we didn't do anything and maybe it went down, we can also validate when it comes to acquisition, for instance, is that maybe if we do an offline, again, event, that we can actually see an uptick in direct traffic, because if we're offline, most likely we gave them some type of collateral, or if we're speaking at an event, our name and our website is up there and they're kind of going to that. So the idea is that we're able to utilize this data to start to, again, set an ROI, set expectations, start to glean information and strategic tidbits from this data. We can also strategize, like for instance, if we find something that was wrong in the behavior flow, if we find out that, maybe a certain page isn't being viewed or isn't performing as well as we thought, maybe there's something we need to do there more. If people are hitting the back button, it could be that maybe the site is loading too slow, excuse me. Maybe they can't access it. Maybe there's an issue there. We've, all of these things that I'm telling you, we've actually found working with clients using Google Analytics. So it can be a super powerful tool to be able to kind of tell us that story and to help us strategize, using that story, or using that data to figure out what the story is, to then strategize for the future on where we want to go with this and what we want to improve. And then last but not least, we can also discover new things. Maybe it's a new target market. Maybe it's, again, understanding when we look at the location map that there's a certain location that we found that we should look to kind of advertise to. For instance, like I worked with a church years and years ago, and they were trying to figure out maybe where they should put a satellite church or kind of do some more community efforts. And they were looking at where people were coming from, again, a geographic area to kind of help with that decision. And it did. And that happened, this happens across other businesses as well, utilizing potentially, again, the language, the location, again, all of those different demographics that I kind of showed you, we can potentially find either new target markets or find out more about a certain target market that we didn't realize prior. And then obviously just kind of feeding into that, new opportunities. Again, there may be new things that we can go after. Maybe there are just new opportunities. And so really at the end of the day, what we're able to do is we're able to validate, strategize, and discover. So those are really kind of the things that we're going to be able to do with Google Analytics. So with that said, I'm going to kind of open it up for questions. And I'm going to go through and just read some of these questions for you guys. And then obviously, yeah, so I'll answer them for you guys. So one question was, could this be used instead of paying for LinkedIn Premium? So again, Google Analytics is going to be completely separate, but what you can do, and this is actually a good question of why I wanted to kind of address this one, is that, again, like Facebook and LinkedIn Premium and all those have their own benefits within their platforms. But what this will be able to help you do and understand is who's leaving those platforms and actually then coming to you. So again, that can be really kind of the beauty of it is, again, looking at that piece and then, again, applying it for that. So one question is once Google Analytics is installed, where do you access it from? Great question. And so a couple ways that you can access Google Analytics. One is just going to google.com/analytics, and you'll be able to log in and go straight to there. The other one is that you can actually download the app on your phone, and you can access it there. I will say, if you do download the app on your phone, you're not going to get the same experience because obviously just because Google Analytics is so in depth, but it is very nice to kind of quickly see things, to get alerts and things like that. But it's either google.com/analytics or the app. So one question was, what is the ideal percentage of the organic search channel? So going back to acquisition, the question is, what's the ideal percentage that search engines should, be for your business? Now, this one's a little bit tricky because some businesses don't rely on SEO as much as others. But what I will say, though, is that more often than not, you most likely want organic search to kind of be your number one referral source. So there's really not potentially a very good percentage I can give you, but what I can say is when we start talking about the ranking, we really want to see that one as high as possible, because a lot of times that's telling us people that were searching for our products and services and didn't know that we exist and then found us. So one of the questions was, can I break down the behavior flow for individual pages? For instance, under blog, it says number 9, but can I understand which individual blogs falls under that number? So you can do some more with this. It does get very sophisticated. You have to actually start. So to be able to kind of do some of this stuff, you actually have to start setting up some customized reports. So again, the Google Analytics, they have a ton, dozens upon dozens of predetermined reports that you can kind of dive into. But when you dive into them, you kind of start to hit a wall a little bit. Some of these things, again, and a lot of them you can do. You just have to set up your own customized reports, which get kind of pretty complicated, but there are a lot of things out there that, again, tutorials and things like that we can follow, or getting some professional help to kind of set those up. Because once those reports, again, are set up, or if you have a customized flow that you want to look at, you can then, again, just kind of leave that and continue to track it. But I will admit, there are some times where, especially when you get really excited about Google Analytics and you get into this, that there are some times where there is a little bit of stop, and it does sometimes get frustrating a little bit at times. So one of the questions is, how do goals and event tracking differ? Really good question. So again, a goal is going to be kind of a multi, almost think about this. Goal is like multiple event tracking in one, meaning that it's a little bit more complicated than just clicking a button. Even though you may think that filling out a form is just the same as clicking a button, there's a lot more things that a lot of times have to go into that form. So a lot of times a goal is going to be more kind of conversion based, and it's going to be kind of a longer process than just event tracking, which again is just clicking a link and either potentially leaving the site or downloading a PDF or anything like that. So goals are much more complicated than event tracking is going to be. So one question is, can I track the action of clicking on our phone number to call us, or clicking on contact us and then submit to contact us via the form? The answer is yes. You can actually use goals and event tracking for both of those things. So for instance, to track how many people are clicking on your phone number, event tracking is perfect for that. If you want to try and do kind of the contact us in the form, that most likely is going to be a goal. But you can actually track both of those things, and not only track them, like we said, we can actually then see how many of them did it on a certain device, how many of them did it from a search engine, how many of them did it from a social media site. So that's where we can actually look at all of those types of things and kind of see that. Perfect. So if you guys have any final questions, put them in there. I think I'm just going through and just making sure I didn't miss any questions. Oh, so I did miss one here, but so yeah, just kind of a final warning, or kind of our 2-minute kind of warning. If you have any other questions, please put them in there. So one question was, how do you take into account the bounce rate into your analytics? Is it good or bad? So it can be good and it can be bad. So the idea though is, hypothetically, we want our bounce rate as low as possible, because that means those people are spending more time on the site. But we have to be realistic and considerate about what our business is and our industry and how our website kind of goes and flows. And so I will say again, like the average is around that 50%. If you start reaching that 75, 80, and I've even seen 90%, again, obviously there is a red flag there of what's going on. Sometimes, for instance, it could be the speed, or someone can't access something on your site. A lot of times you actually see where if you run Google Ads, for instance, that, again, along with when you run Google Ads, a lot of times your bounce rate will increase, because a lot of times how ads are is they kind of come to one landing page, they either do it or they kind of get out. And just kind of the way that the traffic and the way that Google AdWords kind of works. And so it's sometimes important to realize that if we had maybe a 50% last year in 2019, but then in 2020, we started, again, running ads, our bounce rate may increase, and it may not be something to freak out about, because understanding all those situations. So there's a lot of different variables there with that, but, on average, try and have that be as low as possible. So one of them is, what's the recommended time frame for when you should look at your data in depth to possibly make changes? Fantastic question. So a lot of times what I recommend people to do is that I will say, I feel like you can't go super in depth until you've had this running for at least a year so that you can start to kind of compare. Because what can happen is if you start to compare 2 months to the previous 2 months or 1 month to the previous month, there's obviously sometimes there's seasonality and things like that. Whereas when we can do a year, we can start to kind of compare those things. So what I a lot of times recommend people to do is to have it set up where it emails you the analytics on a monthly basis. You should be trying to look at your analytics on a monthly basis, even if it's glancing at them and doing anything like that, just to kind of understand, because you may see some huge spikes, which can help you, identify issues or identify even opportunities sooner rather than later. The other thing to also, again, kind of look at too is I would say about every quarter. So to actually then start to kind of dive in there and to start to kind of look at that. And then also every year at, again, for sure, because we can start to kind of compare that. So part of it does have to know, again, how long you've been running these analytics for. But I would say monthly, quarterly, and yearly can be super valuable, again, for that. Especially, like I said, for if you start setting up conversions and things like that, you're going to kind of want to see, even on a monthly basis, how many are actually, again, coming from maybe a search engine or a social media site or directly to your site and things like that. Perfect. I'm just trying to see if I have any other questions here. So one of them is I have Monster Insights on my website. It seems like it's connected to Google Analytics somehow. So yes, so this is another kind of good thing to kind of bring up is a couple things. One is that a lot of systems like WordPress have different, analytics, plugins. Really what they do is they pull in Google Analytics and then just kind of puts it on the back end of the site. You can actually use things like Monster Insights to actually help you verify your account and actually connect them. So instead of having to do some of that code, you can actually, if you have WordPress, you could use something like Monster Insights to actually, begin kind of connect those together. And so also, it's also important to realize too, I always like to make this distinction, is if you're using one of those DIY builders like a Weebly, a Wix, a Squarespace, again, a lot of times they'll have their own analytics, but do not just rely on those for a couple reasons. One is they are nowhere near as in-depth. They are nowhere near as sophisticated. And more importantly, if and when you ever build off of that platform, if you move from Weebly to Wix, Weebly to WordPress, Squarespace to wherever, you would lose all of that data. So always make sure that you have Google Analytics installed, even if you're going to use the back end of Weebly, Squarespace, Wix, and any of those other kind of website builders for that. So, well, perfect. We're just right up on time here, guys. And so I really want to thank you guys all for tuning in. You guys had my information at the screen there. And I'll obviously be sending this out to everyone. And so just as a reminder, I'll be sending not only the presentation, but I'll also be sending the link once we get this on YouTube. So give us a few days to kind of edit it and kind of get that on YouTube for you guys. And then obviously, if anybody has any questions or anything like that, feel free to reach out. I really appreciate it. We've got a bunch of other workshops and webinars coming up this summer. And so I really encourage you guys to kind of tune in and to kind of check them out. And like I said, we're always here to help and we're always here to answer any questions. So with that said, I hope you guys have a great day. Skol.